Hello and happy Valentine's Day. Welcome to another edition of VU Sports Wire. Cutler Klein here alongside Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Love may be in the air on this Valentine's Day, but you know what's going to start flying through the air shortly? Baseballs. It is baseball season here at Vanderbilt, and we have our season preview for the Vandy Boys, talking all sorts of roster changes, and we're going to even be going through some possible takes about the team and whether or not we think they're valid in our Tinder-themed end of the show. But first, we got to talk about the big storyline surrounding this Commodore team, and that is the departure of two top seniors, Kyle Wright and Jaron Kendall, two guys that were instrumental to this lineup. They were both drafted in the first round, Wright by the Braves and Kendall by the Dodgers. Two guys that, a starting pitcher and a starting outfielder that are going to be tough to replace. So guys, how is this 2018 Vanderbilt team going to be able to replace the production that those guys had?
Right, so when you're looking to replace the production of these two guys, first off, I'm going to take a look at Julian Infante to replace the production of Kendall. Because when you look at Julian Infante's numbers from last year, a lot of times people were talking a lot about Kendall, but Julian Infante didn't get enough credit. He was hitting .315, but something that was really interesting is that he led the team in RBIs, and he and Kendall actually led the team in multi-hit games. So when you're looking at volume of hits, really driving runs in, I think Infante is going to be the one that really has to step up and take that role as being like a major run driver for the Commodore team. And when you're looking at replacing Wright, I don't think any one person necessarily can replace someone like with that level of production. But I'm really looking to sophomore Drake Fellows. He was a freshman last year, up and down at times, had an ERA a little bit above 3, but he had one of the best strikeout rates on the team. And if he has a really good sophomore season, and you see someone like Zach King, who's a left-handed reliever, who's on the watch list for the Stopper Award, if you see those productions really pick up, then I could see almost like, not a pitcher by committee setup replacing the production of Wright, but a lot more pitchers stepping up to cover that production.
Yeah, I think this team will be able to make up for the lack of production, or the loss in production rather, because Kendall and Wright, while they were both stars for this team, their peaks of the season never really overlapped. Kendall started really strong and really fell off towards the end. He had a large strikeout rate for most of the season. He struck out 74 times as a hitter. And Wright started really slow too, and he started to pick it up and become that ace that we all expected him to be, but only towards the second half. So there was really no large point in the season where these two were both at the top of their game. So you're not losing the production of both starters at the same time. I think the production that you might really lose is Will Toffey. Toffey hit .354 last year. It was one of the only positions where really there was never a clear backup. I mean, Toffey got almost every at-bat besides the time he was injured. And so you might see a third base by committee a little bit this season, some freshmen stepping into that role. So there are a lot of roles that need to be filled, but you said it, Infante is going to lead this offense right in the middle of this offense. Hit over 300 last year, hit 11 home runs. He's that power threat. He's a nominee for the Golden Spikes Award. And then on the pitching side of the ball, I mean, Patrick Raby is a very legitimate ace. He might not have the strikeout rate that Kyle Wright does because he doesn't throw 95 plus, but he'll sit in the low 90s and he'll locate his pitches, and he's very, very consistent and reliable. So if he can be that top ace that Vanderbilt expects him to be, and they can get some of that production from Drake Fellows and maybe Jackson Gillis and get a little bit of that power out of the relief, because the relief pitching last year was awful. The bullpen was really this team's downfall. Now these guys, for the most part, have another year under their belt. Zach King, like you said, will be the guy at the back half of that bullpen, and they can really keep this team in game. So it's about starting pitching for the most part, but getting this bullpen to be able to hold on to leads for this team, and I think they'll be okay.
I mean, you mentioned Will Toffey. That's going to be a gap that freshmen could fill, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But overall, something I look at in the outfield is, the absence of Kendall. I think you got to fill that role with a veteran, and a guy I look to for that is Alonzo Jones. Jones is a guy, I compare him to Brett Gardner on the New York Yankees in some way, because if you blink on the base pass, you're going to miss him, because he is that quick, and in the outfield, in terms of fielding, he can get to balls really, really quickly. Basically anything is in play for him. He can get to anything. He can get to something on the wall, short, anything. So I think that's a guy that's going to need to step up. His hitting was not where it needed to be last year at the plate. His stat lines were not ideal, but overall I think he's a guy that can step up. And in terms of pitching, I look at Chandler Day as another guy that could be a huge contributor for starting pitching, and maybe he could slide to the bullpen sometimes as kind of a long reliever if a pitcher like Raby or Fellows runs into some trouble in the first 4 innings of a game. I mean, Day was out away from a no-hitter last year, which was absolutely remarkable. And he's a guy that you're not going to hear a lot about, but he's a talented pitcher. He's a junior now. He's got some experience. He'll probably slide in as the Tuesday starter for most of the year, but if he pitches well, I could see him being thrown in a weekend rotation potentially. And he's the kind of guy that might ease the burden of Wright's departure as well. Do you think there are other veterans on this team that are going to need to be able to step up the Phillies' holes in addition to some of the freshmen we'll get to in a little bit?
Definitely, because I know we're talking about production right now, but when you're looking at just genuine overall leadership, I think Afonte was quoted saying about the junior class that this is our team now. So before they were just like really responsible for production, doing their role, making sure they didn't make any mistakes. Now it's a lot of leadership, because especially since they were lacking depth and we have a lot of freshmen coming in that could be really talented, we're definitely going to rely on some of these juniors and seniors to really coach up the younger class and make sure that they have the same type of Vanderbilt mentality that other players have had.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Jones and other guys, Ethan Paul. These are guys who hit much better 2 years ago than they did last year. And so you don't usually see that dip in production, but you'd like to think that at least from Paul, a guy who hit over 300 as a freshman, 250 is not going to cut it. So he'll probably hit better this season. No one guy is really going to step up and take the place of a Kendall or a Will Toffee. But if everybody can step up a little bit, and I know Paul is somebody who has the capability of doing that, Jones is another guy. If these guys can step up a little bit, they can make up for these losses, and I think this lineup has the potential to really do that. It's a very talented lineup, and we see it every year with these top recruiting classes. This might be the year where they really show out.
Are some of these starters going to have to basically be able to put in 6+ innings of good work every game? Because you mentioned the bullpen was kind of a sticking point for this team last year. They weren't great in the bullpen. They gave up some leads, especially early on, to teams that they should have handled really easily. Now you have a guy like Zach King coming in. He is probably going to be the closer if we had to guess, because he's got plenty of stuff. He's on the watch list for essentially the Reliever of the Year award in Division I college baseball. Another guy I look to is Maddox Conger, who's a junior. He's going to need to play a huge role in playing some of those 6, 7, 8 inning kind of situations. Is this bullpen basically going to be the crux of whether or not this team is competitive this year?
I definitely think so. And I do think it has to do with starters playing a little bit more innings. Because when you look at someone like Drake Fellows, last year, really good strikeout rate, but his ERA was north of 3. And when that's happening, he's not playing as many innings, and he only played 60 innings, or like 60 to 68 innings. So definitely going to want to see that if our offense can drive in more runs and starters can stay out there for longer, I think it's going to be a big help.
Yeah, I think the bullpen's extremely important, but like you said, starters need to throw more innings. And Patrick Raby, someone who did that very consistently last year, he really ate up innings out of that Friday role once he switched to that role. And he's somebody that you can really rely on, and Corbin has said that he can really rely on to pitch 6 innings into a ball game or 7 innings into a ball game routinely on every Friday. And so when you have a starting pitcher who can accomplish that, then you leave your bullpen open and available and fresh and ready to go for Saturday and Sunday. And I think that's the goal. If you can have that top-of-the-line starter that's consistently throwing 6, 7 innings, then you don't have to have, say, Jackson Gillis on Sunday going 7 innings. If he can give you 5 good innings and you have a bullpen that's fresh and ready to go on Sunday, then you can get your best out of your pitcher for 5 innings. So I think that's really going to be kind of the balance for Vanderbilt, finding that balance between starting pitching and bullpen, because pitching wins games in this conference.
We're talking about how players can plug gaps in this lineup that veterans have left open, but now we're looking to the freshmen who Coach Tim Corbin has been pretty vague about what freshmen might get some playing time, especially early on in the season. But there are certainly some freshmen on this team with a lot of talent. They're the #1 recruiting class in the country for this 2018 season. Next year's recruiting class is going to be even better. So this is going to be a freshman class that is integral to the success of this team this year. And guys, who are some of the guys you are looking at? Corbin won't say any names usually when you ask him about his freshmen, so we'll have to see when the players take the field on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday against Duke. But who are some of the guys you are looking at to step up and to become pretty much mainstays in the lineup as freshmen?
Right, so Corbin won't give any indication of kind of who's playing, and so you have to look at what positions are really available and what positions need that breakout production. And a position I really see that from is third base, and I think Jason Gonzalez is going to be the guy who kind of fills that void. I mean, Will Toffee, we said it before, he hit 354 last year. He's heading out. Now there's really no clear player that's going to fill that spot. Alex Brewer didn't have too many at-bats last season, so I think Jason Gonzalez will fill that role, and he's somebody who played a lot of shortstop in high school, now is probably going to move over to third. He has an excellent glove and an even stronger arm, throws 90-plus from third base, but his biggest strength is his immense power that he has. I mean, he bashed 2 home runs in the Black and Gold series, more than any other player on this team. He's a big, strong guy who will be able to complement Julian Infante in the middle of that lineup. A lot of times last year, we saw Jaron Kendall in that 3-hole, and he's more of a prototypical leadoff hitter, but Corbin was kind of forced to put him in that 3-hole to give Infante a little protection. Now we might see Infante and Gonzalez back-to-back. You can't really afford to pitch around Infante because you have another home run hitter coming up right behind him in Gonzalez. I mean, Gonzalez is a guy who was one of the 8 participants in the high school home run derby this past season. His father played in the MLB. His brother's in the Houston Astros organization. His sister played for Team Puerto Rico in the World Championships. So he comes from a baseball family. He's shown it at the high school level, and I think he'll have the potential to do it again at Vanderbilt if he can keep that power going that we've seen early in the fall.
Right. When I'm looking at freshmen to watch, I think a lot about the fact that we've talked a lot about this #1 recruiting class. And what's really interesting is when you look at the top 50 freshmen, we have a lot of freshmen that were placed in that list. And someone that I specifically want to look at is Philip Clark. He's from Franklin, Tennessee, so literally right down the road. And he was the Tennessee State Player of the Year in 2017. And his senior year of high school, he set numerous school records for his high school. So you always like to see that leadership coming out of a player. But something that I think is really, really interesting about him is because since he's so close to Vanderbilt, during all the summer leagues, he's already played with 5 of the guys who are currently on our roster. So when I think about a freshman coming in, getting over that awkward freshman stage, finding their fit and role with the team, I think Philip Clark's someone who can do that right off the bat just because of how close and how familiar he is with Vanderbilt and how close and familiar he is with a bunch of people on this team.
Do you think Clark could slide into a DH role potentially at the start of the year just to get him acclimated a little bit? Because you have a more veteran player in Duval at catcher, and he's a guy that I think the Commodores will look to. But I do agree, and from all indications, Clark has quite a bat. So is it possible that maybe he could see himself in a DH role to start the year at least?
Definitely, especially just to get him at bats, adjusting to the college game. Again, since he was with these players, I definitely think it's something where they're going to want him to get experience right away.
Yeah, I think also he'll get more at-bats just by virtue of the fact that he's a left-handed hitter, and a lot of these pitchers in this conference, top pitchers, are right-handed guys, and so he'll want to throw that top lefty hitter into the lineup, and a lot of times that'll be Clark. I mean, Duval will get his chances as the catcher. He hit 375, granted not too many at-bats last season, but he really showed that he could be reliable as a hitter. So I don't see him supplanting Duval as the starter, but I think he'll get a lot of at-bats out of that DH spot just because of the matchup he poses and the power he brings.
When you're looking at the freshmen on this team, you obviously want them to get experience. You want them to be able to play the game to see who can fit in the lineup and who are some of the guys that can step up for your team. At the same time, you saw last year Vanderbilt struggled against teams that they should have beaten. They lost a series to UIC, a team they play every single year, and usually they wipe the floor with them. They lost that series. So how do you, if you're Tim Corbin, how do you strike the balance between playing your veterans to make sure that there are no freshman mistakes and that you can win these games that you're supposed to win, while also making sure that you can get some of your freshmen the experience they need to be able to step up at the next level?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough balance, and I think when you look 2 years ago, this is a team that only lost 3 games out of conference, and then last season this game was losing non-conference games left and right to teams that they shouldn't have been losing to. So I think it's important to get those freshmen in, but I'd start the season with the guys that you're most confident in. Get those few wins under your belt and make sure you're not throwing a bunch of freshmen into scenarios that they can't necessarily succeed at the same time. So that's not throwing in a freshman pitcher in a 5-4 game in extra innings like they did last year against UIC. So you have to pick your spots if you're Tim Corbin, but a large part of this is getting these guys ready for conference play because the SEC is the best conference in college baseball. And when you get to conference play, a lot of these freshmen are going to be facing hitters better than any hitters they've faced before. So you have to get in your reps, and I understand that might mean sacrificing a little bit of production in these games, but in order to succeed in the long run in SEC play, these freshmen are going to need to get a lot of reps, particularly on the mound against some of these lower-level teams in the non-conference part of the season.
Right, I definitely agree. But I think it's going to be most important to put the freshmen in positions where they can have success, positions where they can like really hone their game and be successful in their own right. And I think something that's going to be really important is making sure that you've shared a lot of these wins before you put these freshmen in for positions. So something like looking at one of the 10 freshmen we have coming in who are pitchers, making sure that they're playing with a comfortable lead before you get them in the game. So just so that they don't have the pressure of the big stage on them, but they're still getting those reps in.
Absolutely. So with the freshmen and the lineup changes all been fully discussed, now we move on to our favorite game, Vanderbilt Valentines. It is Valentine's Day, so we are going to be playing a Tinder-themed game about some takes about the Commodores ranging from mild to pretty hot if you're looking at hot chicken heat levels in that. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to put a take up on the screen, and our panelists here are going to decide whether they swipe right and agree or swipe left and disagree. First take, guys. Vanderbilt's leader in strikeouts will not be named Patrick Raby.
Right. So I'm going to swipe right on this because I think that the leader in strikeouts after the season is going to be Drake Fellows. And I think if you look at Fellows' numbers from last year, it's a pretty convincing case because he had 20 less strikeouts, but he also pitched close to 40 less innings. So I think if Fellows gets out of a little bit of that freshman slump that he was in, gets his ERA down, pitches further into games, I think he could be the one that walks away with more strikeouts after the season.
Right. I'm going to swipe left on this. I think Raby's Ks per 9 will never be as high as Fellows. Fellows will always have more strikeouts per inning than Raby. But I think Raby's going to eat up innings this season to the point where last year he threw over 120 innings. This season, over 100 innings. This season I think he'll throw up to 120 innings. I think he'll really be pushed to throw further into games with this uncertainty in the bullpen. I think he'll really get the most out of the saves because he's consistent. He doesn't throw that many pitches. So I think by virtue of the fact that he's going to eat up so many innings, and Fellows still a little bit of an unknown commodity, I think Raby will post the most strikeouts for this team just because he's throwing the most innings.
Interesting topic there. Second take for you guys. Vanderbilt will finish in the top 3 in the SEC standings. Max, you already mentioned how tough the SEC conference is. Do you swipe right or left on this?
I swipe left on this just because, like you said, the SEC is such a tough conference. And when I said it before, the SEC is the best conference in college baseball. And if you need evidence of that, just go back to the national championship game last year. Florida against LSU, 2 SEC teams. This year, those teams are both in the top 10. I don't foresee Vanderbilt finishing above those 2 in the regular season. And Arkansas is another top 5 team in the coaches' poll. So I think those 3 teams will probably finish the season in the top 3. I see Vanderbilt finishing in about the 4 or 5 range. But when you're finishing in the top 5 in the SEC, you're one of the top teams in the country. And I understand that 5th rank in the SEC might be a number 1 rank in certain conferences. So I think Vanderbilt will be there at the end of the day and have a chance. But I think that these teams just have too much veteran presence and strength, and Vanderbilt to finish just outside the top 3.
Yeah, totally agree. Because when you're looking at the SEC, it's not just top-heavy. There's a lot of depth to it. Because when you're looking at the top 25, 8 of those teams are SEC teams. So that means it's not just 1 or 2 series that it's going to be a really tough, grinded-out type of series, but it's going to be most of their conference games. And that's something that's really tough when it comes to record. So again, when it comes time to the actual tournament, I see their odds being a little bit better, but not for SEC play.
Our final take of this game, guys. Vanderbilt will make it to Omaha in the College World Series. They were there a few years ago, came as a runner-up the year after they won the national championship. Can they make it back?
So this one's tough because Vanderbilt's always a team that comes in with so many expectations, and it's always the team where you say if they get everything together, if they have the depth, if they avoid injuries, it's definitely a team that can make it. Looking at them right now, I just feel like there's too many question marks, so I'm almost begrudgingly going to swipe left on this one. Might be like that Missouri State student who had to go back later and find the accidental swipe left, but right now I'm swiping left on that.
I'm gonna swipe right on this, and I know I just said that I don't think they'll finish in the top 3 in the SEC, but Vanderbilt's traditionally been one of those teams over the past few years that's played by far its best baseball in May and June. And I think they'll have another opportunity to do that this season. We saw that last season after a struggling time in conference play, came out and upset Clemson in the Clemson Regional and ran into a red-hot Oregon State team in Cornwallis that had only lost 4 games all season. I think if they don't play that team, they might get to Omaha. Then the year before, I mean, you have those extenuating circumstances with Donnie Everett. Obviously hard to expect them to win those games. So Vanderbilt has been right there season after season, and I think they'll play their best baseball towards the end of the season. And I really see the pitching of Patrick Raby being the deciding factor, and I think they'll be able to get to Omaha if he can pitch his best.
Guys, thank you for participating in the game, and thank you guys for joining us on this episode of VU Sports Wire. Do not forget, come out and support the Vandy Boys this weekend as they take on their perennial academic rival, the Duke Blue Devils, Friday at 4, Saturday at noon, and Sunday at 1 at the Hawk. We hope to see you there. For Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram, I'm Cutler Klein saying so long, and we will see you next time.